Welcome back to Saints and Sinners, the place where legends ride hard, history gets dusty, and truth shows up wearing someone else's sandals. Go ahead and hit follow, subscribe, and stay with us, because today's tale comes stamped with a mission so impossible, even Hollywood wouldn't touch it. They say every impossible mission starts the same way, with a man handed a task no sane person would accept, a terrain no map could tame, and odds that make even the angels raise an eyebrow. But this mission didn't come in a briefcase that self-destructs. It did, however, come whispered by a faceless voice saying, "Your mission, should you choose to accept it." In true Ethan Hunt fashion, he accepted. Centuries later, some decided that mission needed to be undone. Totally recalled, totally revised, totally rewritten. They tried to turn a life of sacrifice into a scandal sheet, placing him at the top of their hit list and sending their own cultural saboteurs after him, all in an attempt to bury him again, beneath headlines and hashtags. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that even the holiest missions get sabotaged, especially long after they succeed. He was buried twice, once in the ground of the mission he built with his own blistered hands, and again under the weight of controversy from people who never walked a mile in his sandals. But legends, real legends, they don't stay buried. And this man's mission, it refuses to self-destruct. This is Saints and Sinners. He wasn't born a legend. Hardly. Before the missions, before the controversy, before the statues that would later be toppled by people who never learned his story, he was just a small, wiry boy from a wind-whipped island in the Mediterranean. A kid who ran barefoot along the cliffs, chasing goats and dreams with equal speed. His parents were poor, honest, hard-working, the kind of people who thanked God before every meal and after every hardship. They didn't know much about shaping saints, but they knew enough about shaping souls. The boy, short, studious, and stubborn, spent more time watching the horizon than his chores. The sea called him, and so did God. And somewhere between the two, something began to form inside him. A relentlessness, a yearning, the sense that he was meant for more. Not more comfort, not more fame, just more. He took to books like a man possessed. Philosophy, theology, languages, scripture. His mind hardened faster than his body could grow. And soon enough, he outpaced every teacher they threw at him. So they sent him higher and higher, until finally he reached the university. There, he became something he never expected. Brilliant, respected, and most dangerously of all, comfortable. He lectured on theology with the same ease that fishermen cast nets. Students adored him. Professors envied him. His future seemed set. A cozy academic life, sermons that stirred applause, and a career paved with polite, polished success. But comfort has a way of killing callings. And this man, he had a calling that refused to stay quiet. Deep inside him, a voice stirred. The same voice that once whispered, "Your mission, should you choose to accept it." He felt it in the marrow of his bones. God wasn't asking him to teach about sacrifice. He was asking him to live it. So he did the unthinkable. He walked away from prestige, from security, from a future everyone could see but him. He took a new name, a name that meant juniper, and stepped into a pair of sandals that would carry him farther than he could ever imagine. But heaven has a peculiar habit. When you accept one mission, it usually hands you another, and another, each one harder than the last. And the next one waiting for him, it would rip him from his homeland, test his endurance, break his body, and demand a love so fierce it would echo across continents. Because comfort is nice, but calling is relentless. And this man had just stepped into the most relentless one of his age. The mission, his real mission, began not with angels singing, but with ships creaking. A wooden vessel built more for cargo than comfort, heaving against the waves like a dying animal. Rats in the hull, damp straw for bedding, men vomiting over the rails, while the sea wind slapped their faces with salt. This was no first-class passage. This was crucifixion by splinters and seasickness. He had heard stories, rumors really, of distant lands across the Atlantic, lands where the gospel had barely taken root, lands where people lived and died without ever hearing the name of Christ, lands where the church had made a few timid attempts and been swallowed whole. To most men, these rumors sounded like warnings. To him, they sounded like invitations. So he stepped aboard, said goodbye to comfort, and let God decide his future with the winds. The voyage was brutal. Weeks became months. Storms battered the ship until the mast groaned like a dying saint. He prayed more in those weeks than he had prayed in the last decade. At one point, the weather got so violent, the sailors begged him to pray louder, as if raising the volume might raise their chances of survival. And miracle or coincidence, the storm broke. But nature wasn't done with him yet. By the time they reached Mexico, the man who stepped off the ship was not the man who boarded. His legs were swollen, his body weakened, and his nerves were rattled. But the most lasting injury? A simple insect bite on his leg. A bite that refused to heal. A wound that festered. An infection that would torture him for the rest of his life. Every step he took from that moment forward would feel like walking on a nail. Most men would have limped back to the ship, but this man, he tightened the strap of his sandal, whispered a prayer, and walked deeper into the unknown. Because he didn't cross an ocean to go home. He crossed it to build one. A mission, a movement. A miracle, really. And that mission was waiting for him, raw, untamed, and begging for the gospel. But first, he had to pass a test more grueling than the sea. He had to walk, and walk, and walk. There were horses available, sure, carriages too, and he was offered them. But he refused. Why? Because he believed that Christ walked, and so should he. Even with his leg throbbing like a drumbeat of agony, he trekked hundreds of miles through deserts, jungles, and mountains. Heat that could kill a mule, nights so cold they'd crack your teeth, passages that were less roads and more goat trails. Bandits waited in the shadows, snakes in the brush, hostile villages along the way. Still, he kept going. Not because he was fearless. You don't walk into the unknown without fear. He walked because his mission demanded it. And the voice that once beckoned him across the ocean now whispered again, "Keep moving." Miles later, blistered and limping, he finally arrived at a small, struggling mission outpost. Clay walls cracked by the sun, a roof that sagged like tired shoulders, a handful of starving neophytes, and a church presence that looked one good wind away from disappearing entirely. Most people would have seen a failure. He saw a beginning. What he built next would ignite a chain reaction across California, one that would shape nations, cultures, and centuries. But every mission, every miracle, every act of evangelization comes with a cost. And his would break him, remake him, and eventually paint a target on his name for generations to come. The first mission he helped restore wasn't much to look at. A chapel made of mud, a handful of converts, a garden dying of thirst, a priest ready to quit. Not exactly the stuff of epic cinema. But impossible missions never start with glory. They start with rubble. And so he rolled up his sleeves, limping on that wounded leg, and began again. One adobe brick, one prayer, one soul at a time. He preached with fire. He taught with tenderness. He embraced cultures the world dismissed. He defended the vulnerable, even when it meant confronting soldiers 3 times his size. Slowly, painfully, a community grew. And then came the founding of Mission San Diego de Alcala. He didn't wait to be asked, didn't wait for comfort, permission, or resources. He just hiked inland with a handful of men, planted a cross, and said, God will provide. Turns out, God did. But so did hardship. Raids, droughts, food shortages, accusations from settlers, suspicion from native tribes. Every day was a negotiation between survival and sanctity. He learned languages not his own, shared meals with people he'd never met, walked into villages unarmed, took beatings so severe he could barely lift his arms, but refused to abandon the flock who had inflicted them. He wrote letters pleading for better treatment of the natives, letters so bold the military commanders nearly had him expelled. But he would not budge. He built 9 missions with his own blistered hands, 9 sanctuaries carved into the California soil, 9 communities where European and native cultures collided, clashed, and against all odds began to coexist. Mission San Carlos, Mission San Antonio, Mission San Gabriel, San Francisco, Santa Clara, and more. Some welcomed him with joy, others with spears. Yet through it all, he kept walking, kept limping, kept evangelizing. This was his real mission impossible, transforming an unforgiving frontier into a string of outposts rooted in prayer, agriculture, and education, and changing the settlers' hearts from slave owners to freers. But the more he succeeded, the more he threatened the wrong people. The smear campaign began before hashtags even existed. Settlers accused him of cruelty. Soldiers accused him of interference. Politicians accused him of slowing progress. Historians, centuries later, would even accuse him of genocide. Funny thing about lies, they travel fast. But truth? Truth travels like a man with a busted leg in uncharted lands. Slow, but unstoppable. And his truth was simple. He defended the native people when it cost him everything. He wrote a Bill of Rights to protect them from soldiers and make them equal, giving them more rights than America gave Native Americans and African Americans. He demanded proper food, shelter, and dignity. He punished abuse with excommunication, and he walked miles on that same infected leg to Stockton, Monterey, Mexico City, and back again to advocate for indigenous rights. A genocidal tyrant doesn't do that. A man on a sacred mission does. His motto, always forward, never back. By the time he died, he had walked more than 24,000 miles, founded 9 missions, baptized more than 6,000 souls, confirmed over 15,000, and presided over 70,000 marriages. He sparked a movement that would eventually span the length of a future state. But history isn't kind to men who challenge empires. The first burial was the normal kind. He died exhausted, worn down by years of walking, pleading, preaching, and building. He died with no riches, no comfort, just calloused hands, a swollen leg, and a mission completed. They laid him to rest at Mission San Carlos, a simple grave for a complicated man. Then came burial number 2, centuries later, by activists, by politicians, by people who never walked a mile in his sandals, but insisted they knew his heart. Statues toppled, placards condemned him, articles shredded his legacy like a classified document. Mission Impossible had become Mission Misrepresented. But legends? You can bury them. You can drag their names through the mud. You can even rewrite the script. But if their mission was truly God-given, it refuses to die. And this one, his mission, didn't just survive, it thrived. Because this wasn't the tale of a colonizer, or a conqueror, or a tyrant. This was the tale of a man named Junipero Serra, the apostle of California, the architect of the missions, the protector of the indigenous, the saint whose legacy outlived both slander and time. A man who, like Ethan Hunt, took one impossible task after another, limped into the fire, and came out with a saga that refuses to die. After all, God doesn't call you to success. He calls you to be faithful. Let Him make it a success. So the next time you feel the heat for standing your ground, the next time someone rolls their eyes at your faith, edits your motives, or rewrites your story to make it easier to dismiss, remember the man whose mission they've tried to cancel for centuries. He told the truth when it cost him comfort. He defended the defenseless when it cost him friends. And long after he was gone, they tried to bury him again under headlines, hashtags, and half-truths. But here's the secret they didn't count on. You can bury the man, but not the mission. You can rewrite the headline, but not the truth. You can topple a statue, but not a sacrifice. You can distort a story, but not a saint. And you can shout down a man's name, but you cannot silence the mission God assigned him. If you tell the truth long enough, someone will try to shut you up. Tell it anyway, because God writes the final draft, not the critics, not the commentators, and definitely not the crowd. Leave a review, hit subscribe, and follow us as we uncover more stories where the sacred meets the scarred. Until next time, keep your mission steady, your courage stubborn, and your eyes fixed on the truth. Because saints rise, sinners fall, and history bears witness.